So how awesome was that first session? Wasn't that amazing? Well, hello again for later arrivers. Let me welcome you to our 9th Cap Times Idea Fest. Before we start our marquee program of the evening, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors by name. They really do make this event possible year after year. Special thanks to our 3 major sponsors, Epic Exact Sciences and UW Health, the Carbone Cancer Center. Thank you. And thanks to our co-sponsors, Madison Gas and Electric, the Ascendium Education Group, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the University Research Park, the Century House, Penzies Spices, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, all right, go Penzies, the Madison Community Foundation, Cargo Coffee, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the Forward Theater Company, Leopold's Books Bar Cafe, and Madison College. I'd love a hand for them as well. Thank you. Our partners are Hinckley Productions, Civic Media, Wisconsin Public Radio, the Wisconsin State Journal, and Madison.com. Thank you. Thanks for all their support. I'm going to take an extra minute right now to go over a program change for tomorrow night. So I'll try to make this as simple as I can. Due to high ticket demand, we're going to move the 5 p.m. session tomorrow night that had been scheduled for the Play Circle Theater on the floor upstairs to this larger space because there are too many people who want to attend it. The session is organized and presented by the Carbone Cancer Center folks, and it's titled From Breakthrough to Cure, Immunotherapy at UW Health. It'll be a great session. The acting director of Carbone and 2 other oncologists will be on stage. Anyway, there's a reception that precedes that event, that session, at 4, and will still take place outside the Play Circle, 1 floor up from where we are right now. But I know many of you like to get here early as the doors open to get settled. So the doors are going to open at 4:30 tomorrow instead of 5:30, and we will not be clearing the theater after the Carbone session, so maybe you want to come a little early and experience that session as well. As a result, journalist and author Garrett Groff and moderator David Marinis may start a few minutes after the announced 6 p.m. time, but we build in enough time so the evening will still be full. Of course, tomorrow night we have Governor Tony Evers on stage, so we're all looking forward to that. Keep in mind that all tickets for tomorrow night also grant access to the Carbone session. So that's that. On to tonight's marquee speaker, who is, I guess I'd say, an American hero. Stacey Abrams is famous as a Democratic political strategist and candidate, as a voting rights advocate, and as a prolific author. She was a member of the Georgia House of Representatives for more than a decade and eventually became its minority leader. She's the first woman and the first Black American to lead either party in the Georgia General Assembly. Well, while she lost bids for governor of Georgia in 2018 and 2022, she's become a huge national figure for her efforts to vigorously oppose voter suppression in her state and elsewhere. She founded Fair Fight Action, a voting rights organization credited with boosting Democratic candidates all over the place. Stacey Abrams has written 17 books. That's more than even David Marinis. Including romance, thrillers, nonfiction, and children's stories. Her latest is titled Coded Justice, the 3rd in a series about a fictional former Supreme Court clerk, and it's for sale in the lobby, and I understand there are some autographed copies out there. Stacey Abrams, if you didn't know it, was born in Madison. In 1973. And lived here for 3 years before her family moved to Gulfport, Mississippi. She once told an interviewer she doesn't really recall much about Madison. We were just talking about this backstage tonight, other than the cold and the cheese curds. Those pretty much sound like the main things to me. We are thrilled to have Karen Tumulty of the Washington Post back as our moderator tonight. Karen moved from the opinion staff to the Post news side this year to become the Post's chief political correspondent, which is very exciting. Karen has 2 grandchildren in town, which helps us get her back here, and we're delighted to have her. She'll moderate our Saturday night conversation with Illinois Governor J.P. Pritzker. Last year here, thank you, and last year here, you might remember, a Monday night of Idea Fest, she moderated the conversation with Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. So we're thrilled to have her back. Without further ado, please welcome the 2 of them to our stage.
I didn't mean it. You can keep going.
So thank you so much, Paul. As Paul mentioned, Stacey Abrams is a woman of many accomplishments. She was the Democratic leader of the House in Georgia, where she said as minority leader, her job was to stop stupid or at least slow it down. Her gubernatorial campaign launched a national political movement. She's an Emmy nominee. She is a best-selling author of both fiction and nonfiction. But yesterday, she achieved something else. She was a clue in the New York Times crossword puzzle. So I just want to congratulate you on being 43 down.
Thank you. That was my ambition. Thank you.
You know, one of the things that you have put a lot of thought and energy into lately is looking at the concept of democracy and authoritarianism. And both of these are words that people consistently say they really care about. But I think for a lot of people, they're also abstractions. And you've come up with a framework with a Princeton professor that really sort of looks at it and puts it in a very specific and historical context, authoritarianism. So could you walk us through what authoritarianism, how it develops, and what it looks like?
Sure. So we have 3 or 4 days.
Yes.
So first of all, thank you all so much for having me. Thank you, Karen, for moderating this conversation. And it is a joy to be back in Madison, Wisconsin. My mother is still mad at me for not telling her I was coming. Like, I mentioned it, but anyway. But my parents say hi. So I grew up in a family that was very committed to democracy, but not this abstract concept, the real power that's embedded in democracy. And I think we have to start a conversation about authoritarianism there. Democracy is about the ability of people to have a say in how they are governed, where the notion of government exists because we know that left to our own devices, we can only do so much. And so we have this decision-making in the social contract. We decide we are going to share some of our power with others. And we may not get everything we want, but we will build a common framework so that our ability to get what we need is not unfairly impeded. And it's a constant tension to see who gets more and what that looks like. But what democracy should guarantee us is access, if not success. Authoritarianism says that you are not guaranteed either. And in fact, power will be appropriated and aggregated to a single person or to a collection of people who have absolutely no responsibility to be concerned with your access or your success. And in fact, their job is to steal as much of your power as possible and aggregate it to themselves. If you grew up as Gen X, a boomer, a silent generation, and early millennials, we grew up sort of with this framework of what that means. But it was always remote, and it's an important thing to understand that for many people, it's a cinematic conversation, democracy versus authoritarianism. And it usually, in movies, it's attended by Thanos snapping his finger and getting rid of half of you, or worse, it is a junta or a military coup. But in the last 40 years, autocracies have been born from democratic elections. And that's the danger we're in, because for so many of us, our expectation of what it looks like has been so skewed by either cinema or simple dismissal of the possibility here that we don't get it. And so to answer your question, there are 10 steps. I want to give credit to Kim Schuppel, a professor at Princeton University. She and I were on a panel together. I was there to talk about DEI. She was walking through this framework. I give her credit for the framework. I give her apologies because I've kind of remixed it and editorialized it. So the stuff that she didn't say, she knows I say on her behalf. So, or she just disavows, and I'm completely okay with that. But it starts with an election. It's a free and fair election. Although in the United States, we have conversations about exactly what that means. But it's an election that on its face is free and fair, and the person who holds power was elected to that power. But they intend for it to be the last free and fair election. Step 2 is then the expansion of executive power. The autocrat or authoritarian starts to appropriate to himself, because it's always men, they appropriate to themselves more and more power, and they push the boundaries of whatever rules seem to exist. And they do so because they believe that they will not be stopped. And one of the ways they guarantee that is step 3, which is that they weaken competing powers. In the case of the United States, the example is that we have a complicit Congress that has abdicated its responsibilities for the power of the purse, for the power of war. Almost every power that it has been accorded by the Constitution, it has either abdicated or it has willingly handed over and encouraged and suborned behavior that is antithetical to our Constitution. And then on the other side, you have a judiciary where you have a Supreme Court. You have lower courts that are doing their level best, but are facing an increasingly remote Supreme Court that is issuing decisions without explanation, or that very explicitly abdicates its obligation, saying, well, we can't enforce it, so we're not going to bother doing it. At the most benign end, and where I am most concerned, is the very aggressive agreement with the worst excesses. And we can talk about how they yesterday agreed to return us to the days of Plessy v. Ferguson and Korematsu by saying that people of color could be stopped on the streets to show their paper because they were dark. But that's a different conversation. But that's step 3. Step 4 is that you have to break government so it doesn't work. And that's critical, because democracy only works when people think that there's something they'll get for it. You agree to share your power with others because you're going to get something from it. So if you can break government, people stop thinking that democracy is worth the fight. That's why the initial effort of this administration was firing civil servants. You don't do it because you're worried about fraud, waste, and abuse. You're worried about success, service, and delivery. And so you fire all the people who can do it. You crush people and their dreams, but you also stop their access to basic functions that they've gotten used to. On my podcast this week, we're talking with teachers. because 50% of the Department of Education is gone, and families are about to experience how hard it is to get an IEP for your child with special needs, because the people who would process that or force the school system to abide by that no longer have jobs. So you break democracy so it doesn't work, so people start to think a pox on everyone's houses because I can't get what I need. Then you have step 5, you install loyalists. Those loyalists are not loyal to the Constitution. They're not even loyal to a party or an ideology. They're loyal to the authoritarian, and their only mission is to do what the authoritarian tells them to do. That's why you're watching this president and the Republicans, who are complicit in this process, go after the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, go after Lisa Cook, the Federal Reserve person, go after the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency because he dared to say that perhaps Iran did not lose all of their nuclear capabilities, despite, the orange leader telling us that it happened. You do that because you need people in positions of power to go after your enemies, to do what you say, and to break the mechanisms that will ever unseat you. Step 6, and I promise I'm going faster now. Step 6, you go after the media. And that's why we see lawsuits and extortion of our major broadcast networks. That's why you see the gutting of public broadcasting. It is why you see the demonization of critical media, but it's also why you see echo chambers being created and lifted up. It's why the FTC is preparing, and the FCC, sorry, is preparing to lift the ownership cap on Sinclair News so that they can have dominion over all local news and turn it into a propaganda machine, the likes of which we have never seen in this country, except when Fox News was able to do it when Ronald Reagan lifted the fairness doctrine. Then you get to step 7. So you've broken the media, you've broken government, you've put in loyalists in place, you've sublimated the competing powers, but you gotta blame someone, because all the things you've done have made it harder for people to live. So that's when you start to see the proliferation of anti-DEI executive orders, because you've got to scapegoat vulnerable communities and blame them for everything. And that's why immigrants are being blamed for inflation, even though they pour billions of dollars into this economy. It's why transgender children have become scapegoats for every ill in society. Because if you can blame black people and brown people and women in the LGBTQ communities, when you can go after DEI, you basically pit people against one another so no one is blaming the government that's doing the harm. Step 8, I'm almost at the end. Step 8 is when you go after civil society. It is why you see them suing law firms into complicity. It's why universities are under attack. Universities taught us what our rights are, so you want to remove their ability to actually share the truth. You go after philanthropies and accuse them of funding the wrong people. You go after protesters and tell them if they lift their voices, they will be summarily deported or possibly have their citizenship revoked, and you call them into silence. Step 9, you privatize violence and you militarize law enforcement. You occupy Los Angeles and DC, and you threaten to invade Chicago. Because if you have a secret police, people are afraid that they're being overheard. If you have the right to abduct people because of what they look like and the language they speak, if you can be not just taken from the streets, you can be kidnapped and deported in this country, then people are afraid to possibly dissent because they may be next. And when you've done all of those steps, step 10 is the final step. You make certain you end democracy as we know it. And the way you do that isn't by eliminating elections. Russia has elections every 4 years. Maduro ostensibly was elected in Venezuela. Erdogan will tell you he has been elected multiple times in Turkey. You don't block elections. You make certain those elections never reflect the will or the needs of the people, because you've redistricted Texas and Missouri in order to make certain that you've rigged the election in your favor. You purged 471,000 voters in Georgia because the last election had a margin of 115,000 people. You change the rules so that democracy no longer works for people. And if you do all 10 steps, authoritarianism not just arrives, it settles in and it becomes an inevitable force, and you cannot uproot it unless you start fighting it soon.
Well, Leader Abrams, we asked people in the audience before they came for their questions. And so many of them were essentially the same question. What can I do about this? It's one question. In addition to protests, showing up to town halls, calling and emailing our representatives, which are great but don't seem to be enough, what do you think would be the most effective and impactful steps leading up to the midterms?
So first, we have to stop thinking that the midterms are going to solve this. That is not true. The midterms are critical, but this is a power grab. And they aren't going to be stopped by an election that they've rigged. They're not going to be stopped because there was a speed bump. So we cannot think that if we reach the cinematic moment of the midterms, then all will be well with the world. That is not how this works. This is an existential fight about the nature of democracy in the United States of America. And if we think of it as anything less, we are misreading the moment. So with that said, yes, protest is absolutely important. And the reason protest matters is that silence is consent. And so even though it's not going to change their minds, it reminds the people of what we have so they remember that they want to keep it. Because the reason I walk through those 10 steps, and the reason I'm going to keep talking about the 10 steps, is that we have to recognize authoritarianism when it arrives. It does not look like the movies. It looks like not being able to go to a national park because they fired all of the rangers. Because that inconvenience turns into a permanence, and we stop remembering that we could do it, and then they start charging us money to let us into the park because they've now privatized it. So we've got to remember, authoritarianism isn't just about power, it's who profits from that power, who benefits from that power. So yes, protest matters. Calling on your local, state, and federal leaders, not just the federal folks, because this isn't just what's happening in DC. This is happening everywhere. And so we can't let anyone off the hook. And the reason you have to keep calling on them is that they want you to be silent. They want you to just accept that it is. But here are the other things we can do. People have to remember what good government felt like. And until we have power, we have each other. Before we had power, before we had money, we had each other. We had mutual aid. It is insufficient to fill the chasm that government fills because we can't do it at the scale that government does it. But we've got to show up and help people and remind them of why things are broken. When children stop getting school lunches in about 2 weeks because the SNAP cuts and the USDA cuts start to hit schools, we've got to make sure that we are handing out backpacks full of food to help those children from Friday to Sunday not starve. And we have to tell their families we're doing it because we want to stop authoritarianism. We've got to show up at the clinics where people are being turned away because they no longer have enough coverage. We've got a lot of veterans who are watching their premiums go up, but their services go down. We've got to show up in those spaces and remind them that they fought to protect us, and we're going to fight to protect them. It feels small, but those acts of proving democracy delivers are critical because people won't fight for something that never fought for them. It's critical. And then the last, and I'm going to put together, we're doing a toolkit, so I'm going to be putting out more of these things. But if you listen to my podcast, if you read my Substack, every single thing I do, I include calls to action. And they feel diffuse, but the point is, the way you beat authoritarianism is reminding people of what they have and what they need and showing them they are seen. Authoritarianism sinks into us and it convinces us that paralysis was a natural state, that not having what we need was inevitable. And so the most effective countermeasure is to disrupt misunderstanding, to deny the power of the authoritarians, and to organize ourselves to push back wherever we can, whenever we can. And I'll keep putting out more ideas about how we get that done.
Well, I want to ask you specifically about young people because I've written about, in fact, there's an outfit out of Penn State called the Mood of the Nation poll. And for decades, they have been asking the question, is democracy always the best system? Or does it make no difference at all? Are there actually some circumstances where a dictator is preferable? And So the latest one, which was in 2022, 78% of the population said democracy is the best political system in all circumstances. But when you got to Gen Z, nearly half of them answered it makes no difference whether they live under a democracy or a dictatorship, or that a dictatorship could be good in certain circumstances. So tell me, how do we, my generation grew up during the Cold War. We thought that our survival was literally threatened by authoritarian regimes. How do we convince young people that democracy, in fact, matters?
This goes back to the reason it's so critical that we don't just use the terms of art, autocracy, democracy, fascism, authoritarianism. We have to connect it to their lived experience. And as you just described, we both grew up in generations where our lived experience was a very clear understanding of what democracy looked like and what autocracy looked like. Gen Z grew up with China providing everything. They don't remember.
And kicking our butts economically.
They don't recall. They never had the experience of China not being a part of their everyday. So this notion that it's some specter of evil has never been real for them, because they wouldn't have PlayStations if we didn't have China. They wouldn't have phones. And so their lived experience is that China's just another place, and apparently they produce good stuff even though they've got a dictator. They grew up under a president who lauded Putin. And so if you are learning what your leaders say, they did not grow up under presidents consistently who said that dictatorship was bad. They grew up under presidents who said dictators were okay, that Kim Jong-un was an okay guy, was a good guy, because they don't know what the Korean War was about. They just know there might be two of them. There were two countries. And so we can't presume that they have the lived experiences that we have. But they also need to understand what democracy was supposed to deliver for them. These are kids who grew up with active shooter drills, who grew up under a pandemic where instead of us coming together as a nation to protect their lives, we argued over the inconvenience of wearing masks. They grew up being told that their lives were sacrificial because we didn't want to remove some abstract notion of a Second Amendment. And so instead, they had to learn the hero rules, to hide, escape, run, and overcome. When you are a fourth grader who is taught that you have to throw your books to save your life, you don't care who's in charge, because no matter who's in charge, they don't care about you. And so our job is to not simply talk about democracy in the abstract. We have to do the work of showing them that democracy can deliver, because they have no real reason to believe that. But you can't lecture people into changing their minds. Raise your hand if you've actually ever won an argument. Exactly. What people learn from is not what you tell them, it's what you show them. And this is the moment we can show that generation that democracy is worth the fight. But they will not understand it if we do not help them recognize what it looks like, help them activate around it, and then most importantly, help them co-create and build the America we should have had all along. That's our responsibility.
Well, in Washington, of course, the Democrats have had a complete power outage. But at the end of this month, the Democrats in Congress are going to face a choice, because we have the end of the fiscal year coming up, and without their votes, they're not going to be able to keep the government open. Now, in the past, it's generally been the Republicans who've shut down the government. Should the Democrats do it this time? And what should they give as their rationale?
Well, let's be clear. Democrats can't shut down the government. We don't have the majority. So we need to be really clear that if the government shuts down because the people in power refuse to compromise and have conversations with Democrats, Republicans are shutting down the government. They have the power, so they hold the power, they have the responsibility, and therefore they own the consequences. Now, as the minority party in negotiation, which is a job I have become very used to, When I was minority leader, in addition to saying stop stupid or at least slow it down, I explained to my colleagues, they give you leader to make you feel good. They put minority in front of it so you never forget your place. But once you understand that, then you understand what power you do hold. And in this case, the power that Democrats have should be to demand that impoundment become real, that the President of the United States cannot subvert the will of Congress and decide not to appropriate the funds that Congress sends. That has to be part of one of the conditions. Number two, we have to ensure that the healthcare cuts to the ACA, to the HHS, the fact that the CDC is no longer tracking STDs in this country, because that always goes well for us. That the fact that critical systems in this country have been eroded in 8 months, that should be an absolute no deal. If you do not restore funding to the critical health of our country, we cannot work with you. And then number three, it should be impermissible that a single person can decide to occupy Washington, D.C., and harass people and tell people that they do not have the same rights as citizens in this country as anyone else. At least those three conditions, in my mind, should be absolute deal breakers. But I'm not in charge, but that's what I would say.
Well, could we back up a little bit to one of the things that you had mentioned, which we've heard a lot. There's been a lot of media attention to the cuts on Medicaid, but I think a lot less attention to what's happening to the Affordable Care Act. And specifically, a lot of this is happening in red states. Could you talk a little bit about that?
So you've got two component pieces. In the theft bill that they passed, where they stole from the working class, they stole from the young, and they stole from America to fund the wealthiest among us, one of the ways they are paying for it is cutting back on the subsidies that were embedded in the ACA. The Affordable Care Act funds health care for millions of Americans. And even if you are not on the ACA, you are in danger if this happens, because hospitals cannot afford the services they provide without those subsidies. In the absence of those subsidies, they will do three things. They will raise prices, they will cut services, or they will shut down hospitals. And if we think that's just a rural issue, it is not. I live in a city, Atlanta, where we lost a hospital in 2022 in the height of the tail end of the pandemic, but when cities were flush with cash. But Georgia is one of the states that refuses to expand Medicaid, so we get less money already, and the very little money that's coming in because of the ACA subsidies are helping to support our hospitals. Well, Wisconsin, you are another state that has refused to expand Medicaid. No one in here did it, but in a state that has refused to expand Medicaid, it's red states, blue states, and purple states that have red leaders or have red dominion over the ACA and Medicaid expansion. Without those dollars, it's not just our hospitals, it's also our military. Most people don't realize that not everyone who is a veteran is entitled to TRICARE. So we have veterans who cannot get health care without the ACA, without Medicaid expansion. And they are being denied, and that denial will become even more hardened if we do not restore and sustain the subsidies that go with the ACA.
So are the Democrats pushing that message as hard as they should be at this point?
I think there is an attempt to tell all of these things, but there is so much. Part of the strategy of authoritarianism is the chaos. You break everything so that no one can pay attention to anything, and that goes back to what we should be doing. One of our jobs is to communicate what's happening. And I know people are like, well, it's too much, and I'm getting... You don't have to talk about everything, but talk about the thing that matters to you. So yes, I think Democrats are talking about it, but they're also talking about what's happening with the fact that, I talked about it this past week, that on Labor Day, the Republicans announced that they are now piloting a Medicare program that will allow an AI algorithm to determine whether or not our seniors get certain healthcare treatments. And the companies that are participating make money based on how much they save. Those are death panels. Let's be clear. Those are death panels because when you can have an algorithm determine the quality of care and decide and override a doctor or recommend a lower quality of care, because they won't be so dramatic. It'll be a lower quality of care, that you can't have the medication, or they say, well, you don't have the thing we think you have. I heard Paul mention immunotherapy. If you are a patient who's receiving immunotherapy and they decide it's not working fast enough, or that you have concomitant issues, and they decide that you're not qualified for immunotherapy, it's not going to kill you tomorrow, but it reduces the likelihood of your survival. That's what we're talking about. And so we have to, your question is, are Democrats doing enough? That's not the question. Are we doing enough to talk about what's happening? We cannot expect the 435 members of the House and the 100 members of the Senate have responsibility. But they'll be fine. There's not a poor person up there. But we are the ones who will bear the price. And so my issue, I do care what my party does. I do want my party to be as vocal as possible. But I take personal responsibility for what we have. Some people have been complaining about the fact that I won't go away. I didn't get the job. I applied for the job twice. They told me no twice. But the thing is, not getting the title doesn't exempt me of the work. If I'm a citizen, if I'm a patriot, patriotism doesn't care what my title is. It cares what my position is. And my position is an American who refuses to allow my nation to be stolen from out from under me by someone who does not care about the people in it. And so, yes, we want Congress to do more, but we don't have to wait for Congress. In fact, we can't wait for Congress. We've got to save ourselves.
Okay, you opened that door, so I'm going to walk through it. Are you going to run for something again?
So, here's what I'd say. Don't clap yet. You may not like my answer. Politics is an important tool. It will always be an important tool. And it's one I've used. Bless you. But there are other tools in my toolbox. And my responsibility is to figure out what tool is useful for the moment we're in. And the moment we are in right now, I don't know that we will have elections that are worth the paper they're written on in 2026. So my job right now is to ensure that we are doing everything in our power to save not just our democracy, but to save our lives. They are kidnapping Americans. They are seizing people off of the streets, and the Supreme Court just said that it is perfectly okay to racially profile and then abduct people in this country and to deny them due process. And let's be clear, due process is not accorded to citizenship. It is accorded to presence. If you are in this country, you are entitled to due process. And if anyone thinks, well, maybe that shouldn't be true, let's remember that Native Americans were not citizens of this country until 1921. The 14th Amendment passed in 1867, or was ratified in 67, passed in 1865. What that means is that if citizenship was the only thing that entitled you to due process, Native Americans were not entitled to due process in their country until 1921. We cannot wait for an election to stop the authoritarian rise. So it's a very long way of saying I don't know what I'm going to run for, but I know I'm going to keep running my mouth until we fix what we have to do here.
Well, you have talked about this, though, as a long-term project. And I think there has been an assumption that Donald Trump is such a singular figure that once he is off the scene, which presumably happens at some point, that Trumpism fades, that what has been built begins, that there's no other figure out there who can sort of pick this up and carry it on. What do you think?
That is wishful thinking of the highest order. So I'll give you a few names. Nicolas Maduro. He has been the dictator who runs Venezuela for years. He didn't start it, Chavez started it. Hugo Chavez was the charismatic leader who got elected to power on a populist platform and then transformed Venezuelan democracy into the autocracy we see today. Then there is Castro. Who can tell me which Castro brother is in charge of Cuba? Is it still a Castro? Exactly. Xi Jinping. That's a different one. But let's talk about Erdogan. We keep thinking that this is about the person. These people are avatars. They are perfect populists in the moment that they are needed to seize power, but they are often either puppets or avatars, but they are never the architects. That's the problem we have. We keep thinking they're the architects. But if you want to know why we are missing 300,000 black women in public service right now, look at Russell Vogt. He's the head of the OMB. He is the person who decided to let Doge take the fall while he did the dismantling. Look at Stephen Miller, who's the person who's architecting the rise of Christian nationalism and the restoration of what he considers the necessary white homeland of America. So let's not give Donald Trump too much credit. He is a he's a singular figure who was able to harness what they needed, but they've been looking for him for a while. Because what is called Project 2025 has been published every 4 years since 1980. And there was this other guy who they thought might be able to get it done. His name was Ronald Reagan. And his revolution changed America. It was under his guidance and under his leadership that income inequality engulfed our nation, that we lost who we were. And what Donald Trump is taking advantage of is his singular positioning in a moment of polarization. He didn't create it. He's not even the one in charge of leveraging it, but he is great at parroting what they tell him to give him what he needs, because he's making billions of dollars a week in order to give them access to power. And when he leaves the stage to go to whatever island he buys with all the money he and his children steal, there will be someone waiting in the wings. In fact, his name is J.D. Vance, who just said that it was perfectly okay to murder Venezuelan citizens using military force, and that he didn't care. So if we think that it's just about surviving Trump, we are delusional. Trump is the avatar. He is not the end game.
So you had mentioned earlier the sort of gang war that we're seeing over gerrymandering with, Texas is going to do what Texas is going to do, and then California is going to do what California is going to do. So last year, as it was, of the 435 House races, fewer than 36 were decided by 5 points or fewer, which meant every other seat was just pretty safe for whoever won the primary, whether it was a Democrat or a Republican. Where do you think once all of this settles down, whether it's Texas or Missouri or California, let's face it, the Democrats have fewer opportunities on this score. I mean, so we'll have an election next year, but presumably so few of the districts anymore are even in true contention. So what does that do to the rest of the country that essentially finds itself bystanders?
So I don't want us to conflate too many pieces. I think what you've asked is very important, but we need to separate out the pieces. Gerrymandering is a scourge. It has always been a scourge. You should never allow politicians to pick their voters.
We're in Wisconsin.
I know. I'm saying it out loud to you because you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. It is a scourge that should never be permitted, and it is why it's been critical in states that were willing to take the lead to try to create independent redistricting coalitions and independent redistricting commissions to try to solve the problem. But the challenge is, in a nation that is constructed like America, only having a few people play by the rules means everyone else pays the price. And we've been okay with that. We've been quietly trying to get things done and lead by example in the states that had the ability to do so. Where we are today is not normal times. And I appreciate the framing you used, but I would push back against it. This isn't about gang war. This is about one side that is attempting to rewrite the rules in the middle of the game and the other side trying to nullify their attempt. Nullification is not the same as being in pitched battle. California is not saying we're going to do this because we just want to. They're saying we're going to nullify your ability to steal the future from our people. We're not going to make it better for everyone, which is an actual independent redistricting coalition that we would have had we been able to pass the John Lewis Act in 2021. If we'd gotten that, we'd be in a very different posture right now. But in lieu thereof, what we are going to do is make certain that every time you take a step, we're going to at least try to nullify the effectiveness of that step. And so I am all for any attempt to at least hold serve. Because long term, we cannot sustain this nation if we do not fix voter suppression, and gerrymandering is a part of the voter suppression architecture of this country. It is absolutely true. And we know this because, yes, when you don't have competitive races, when people opt out of democracy because they know their voices don't count, then you don't have functioning democracy in those places. And so it is incumbent upon everyone who believes in democracy, small d, to believe that gerrymandering is wrong, irrespective of who does it. When you have to compete on the value of your ideas versus your ability to manipulate the system, the outcomes are different. And so we have to get through this moment, but not just survive it. We actually have to build the thing that we need. But we cannot build while the house is on fire. And that's part of the challenge that we face. And so I, as someone who has spent much of my adult life, I set my first voter registration table when I was 17. I was the most lonely child at Spelman College because nobody stopped at that table. I believe in democracy not because of the abstract concept, but because my grandfather was born 25 years after the end of slavery. Because my parents were not full citizens of this nation for the first 20 years of their lives. I'm the first generation of Abrams children to be born with full citizenship in the United States of America. That should not be so. And my nieces and nephews have lost civil rights during their lifetime. That also should not be so. And so gerrymandering is not an abstract concept, and anything that we can do to stop the erosion of democratic rights in this country, we should do. We should never engage in the theft of the right to vote. We should never engage in an act of voter suppression. But if we can hold, serve, and nullify those who are stating aloud their intention to manipulate our elections out of utility, then we should do what we can to make that stop.
So could I bring you back a little closer to home, which is Georgia?
Yes.
Next year, Democrats are going to be defending a Senate seat. Is Georgia still a purple state?
Yes. So let's talk about what the colors mean. You guys are a purple state too. We learned from you. So blue means Democrats win without really having to fight. Red means Republicans win without having to fight. Purple means you got to fight. Purple does not mean that one color wins or not. It means that there has to be competition to determine the outcome. I promise you, given the number of people lining up to run after John Ossoff, this is a purple state. And if you look at the last election, Kamala Harris lost by 115,000 votes in a state of 11 million people. We are a purple state. The question is, how dark does the purple get? How close do we get to blue or lavender? Or how close do we go to crimson? And so, yes, we are a purple state. John Ossoff is going to continue, bless you, to be our U.S. Senator, and we are going to do everything in our power to make that so.
And so how does this play out in Georgia, where we saw all kinds of, strange things happening with the election machinery? I mean, there are a lot of people who wonder if next year's elections are going to be, and you've talked about changing the rules now, but when it comes down to election day and the actual machinery and the actual officials who are in charge of conducting these elections, how worried should people be?
Very worried, and we should be worried everywhere. So here are the things that this administration, again, not just the president, but this administration and Republicans at state and local levels are doing. So right now, Georgia's in the middle of a pitched battle. There are 2 election deniers who are demanding to be seated on the Fulton County Board of Elections. And the Democrats are refusing to vote for people they know tried to manipulate the election outcomes. And the court has said, the lower court said, you have to seat them anyway, and they are fining Fulton County $10,000 a day until these duly elected Democrats agree to vote into power people they know do not believe in the constitutional obligations they will seek to hold. That's Georgia. We have a governor who got lauded for not committing treason. That's what he did. All he did was not commit treason like 49 other governors. And a Secretary of State who did not commit treason like 49 other Secretaries of State. But because they decided to publish the stories, they got treated like these lions of democracy as they passed some of the most egregious voter suppression legislation in America and let it get franchised to all of these other states. And because we had one moment where they were mean to the guy we didn't like, we forgot that they were even meaner to the people they were supposed to serve. That's what's happening in Georgia. Brian Kemp purged 1 million people from the rolls, and 4 years later got treated like a lion of democracy. We cannot get distracted by the headlines and leave behind the people who should be served. And what's going to happen in Wisconsin, what's going to happen in Georgia and across the country is that we are going to give people too much credit for things they did and not pay attention to what they are doing. They are trying to eliminate vote by mail. The president has said he wants to, by executive order, eliminate it. He can't, or he shouldn't be able to, because the Constitution accords that power to the states. But if we don't fight back and demand that vote by mail continue to be permitted, that's not just about whether Democrats or Republicans vote. It's about whether senior citizens can participate. It's about whether the disabled can participate in elections. When they change voter ID laws, Wisconsin, you guys were ground zero. In 2016, so in my book, Our Time Is Now, I wrote about the fact that in 2016, a woman's case made it to the Supreme Court because when Wisconsin changed its voter ID laws and said that you had to have an original birth certificate, an elderly black woman who was born in the Jim Crow South, who was not permitted to have an original birth certificate, could not get a valid ID in the state of Wisconsin to cast a ballot for the first time since 1968. So we've got to understand that it is not the language they use, it's the intention behind it. There is no voter fraud. What there is voter suppression. We don't have a voter integrity issue. We don't have an election security issue. We have people who do not want to hear from the people who should get to speak. That's what we've got to focus on. And so, yes, we should be looking at what they are doing with the machines. But we also have to look at whether or not they're going to finance the election officials who should be doing this work. Because one of the ways they're threatening to overturn elections or to suborn or undermine elections is that they're threatening to hold back election security dollars from our county officials. If you can't do your job, then you can't make certain that our elections are actually happening. So yes, we need to be worried, and we should be talking about it now. And Ron Johnson needs to hear from you right now, and you need to be demanding right now, even if you didn't vote for him, make him look that up. Make him work to prove that he should get to keep the job. Tammy's good. She's doing the right thing. But we have to be loud because, yes, they are going to try to manipulate the election machinery, both in the construct of elections, but the physical act of casting ballots. They are going to try to push voter ID laws that are designed not to prove who you are, but to prove you don't deserve to be. No one has ever disagreed with voter ID. It has never been a question of should you prove who you are. It's how hard should it be to prove that your citizenship is real and valid and true in this country. That's the fight we're having. Sorry, I get really emotional about voting.
But you know, in the first few months of this second term of Donald Trump, it really looked like the courts were going to be the guardrails.
Yes.
What
So the lower courts are doing what they can, but that's why you saw the accelerated appointment of judges under his first term and the accelerated appointment of judges currently. They knew what they were doing. They wanted to put in place, when I said, they weaken competing powers. They couldn't weaken everything at the district court level. They've done what they can at the appeals level, and they got what they wanted at the Supreme Court level. But when the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, in an opinion, essentially abdicates responsibility because they don't have enforcement power, and therefore, well, he shrugs and says, well, what can we do? Or worse, when you have a shadow docket that issues opinions and allows the perversion of the Constitution for as long as it takes for it to make its way back to you, when federal district court judges have to write a letter to the Supreme Court saying, we can't do our jobs because you won't tell us what you mean. There should never be ambiguity in the Supreme Court's decisions. And they are using that power to scuttle democracy. And so, yes, our court should be better, and there are good judges doing the best they can. But when the Supreme Court thinks that it is more important to bend the knee to the President of the United States and to an ideology that says that most of us shouldn't be here, then we no longer have a functioning Supreme Court, and we have to build the power we need to fix the courts, to fix the Congress, and to fix the presidency for the next generation.
So, in the few minutes we have left, because I'm afraid we're going to send everybody home and they're all going to get into the fetal position.
No. You should be in the fighting position.
So,
you're good.
But tell me, what gives you hope?
So the 10 steps that I talk about, and you're going to hear me talk about a lot, the 10 steps are designed for us to understand the 10 steps it takes for autocracy and authoritarianism to take hold. But the corollary is that there are 10 steps to freedom and power. Our job is not to be afraid of what they're doing. It is to believe in our power to do what is right. That's our job. Patriotism isn't easy. Patriotism demands of us sacrifice and risk, but we have to understand we all have different levels of risk tolerance. I don't need everyone to do everything. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, fantastic title for a movie, terrible mission statement. But what gives me hope is that we can all do something somewhere soon. This is like a photo mosaic. You remember a few years ago when you would see an image of the U.S. flag, and then you'd zoom in and it's all these little images of different people's faces. That's what fighting authoritarianism looks like. We don't all have to be doing the same thing, but we all have to be doing something. That's our responsibility. That's what gives me hope. Because when we all decide to do something, the world changes. That's how we got this nation. It's how my parents, at the age of 14, were able to fight for civil rights. My dad got arrested when he was 14 years old for registering black people to vote in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And in a single generation, My grandfather, who was born 25 years after the end of slavery, saw his daughter become the first person in their family. He passed away by then. But his daughter became the first person in their family history to finish high school, let alone go to the University of Wisconsin-Madison and get a master's degree in library science, and produce the first black woman to become a gubernatorial nominee in the history of the United States. That's what we can do. So we don't need to go home and get in the fetal position. We need to get into fighting position. We are fighting for our nation. We are fighting for our future. We are fighting for our rights. And if we believe in this fight, we can win.
Well, Leader Abrams, I think you have given people a lot to think about, and I just want to thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Please help me thank Karen Tumulty for asking amazing questions.